Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Brenda Woodbridge, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about governing democratized BI for faster return on investment. Our sponsor today is Metric Insights. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from Dave Stoddard with TDWI. After Dave speaks, we have a presentation and demo from Mike Smithman with Metric Insights. But before I turn over the time to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of the presentation, our speakers will host a question and answer period. If at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type that in. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, click on the Help area located below the slide window and you'll receive assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweet. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the click here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. In addition, we are recording today's event and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you'd like, or feel free to share it with a colleague. So again, today, we're going to talk about governing democratized BI for faster return on investment. Our first speaker today is David Stoddard, Senior Director of Research for BI at TDWI. As an analyst, writer, and researcher, Dave has provided thought leadership on key topics in BI, analytics, IT, and information management for over 2 decades. Previously, he headed up his own independent firm and served as Vice President and Research Director with Ventana Research. He was the founding Chief Editor of Intelligent Enterprise, a major publication and media site dedicated to the BI and data warehousing community, and served as Editorial Director there for 9 years. With TDWI Research, Dave focuses on providing research-based insight and best practices for organizations implementing BI, analytics, performance management, and related technologies and methods. Great to have you here, Dave. I'll turn things over to you now.
Thank you, Brenda, and welcome to everyone today, and thanks for joining us. We got a big attendance here of attendees today, so it's terrific, and I think it's evidence that we're going to be talking about something that's very important to a lot of people in our audience. They really kind of how to balance the issues around governance and then democratizing BI, which is, I think, this year is certainly one of the big issues that organizations are facing. So let me just start by just talking about the need to know, driving democratization, just sort of we can think about what are some of the things that are going on there. And it's just increased demand, I think, for getting beyond simple consumption. Of course, not to belittle that, because a lot of users out there who didn't have it before now have dashboards where they can consume data that they didn't have before. Before they could make decisions either without the data or with older data that may have been extracted into a spreadsheet. Well, now they can get to at least consume that data, but that's often just the first step in wanting to get beyond that simple consumption so they can get those sharp insights, what's happening now, get more descriptive information, closer to real-time information about what's happening, to affect operational decisions, to affect decisions with a customer at that very moment. You want to have it at the point of decision, knowing what is happening, so getting context around those decisions, and then, of course, what is likely to happen in the future. So we're seeing huge influx of use of predictive analytics and AI and machine learning to develop a better understanding of what kinds of trends and patterns are going to impact decisions that are being made right now. So data-informed response to the unexpected, that's really been a key theme of our, 2+ years now. Lots of new situations, and it just sort of the beat goes on. Here we are in the summer, a lot of difficult weather situations around the globe that are affecting supply chains, affecting consumer markets, things that are unexpected are happening, demand for some things that may not have been expected, whereas less demand for others. And so it's affecting kind of everything, and being able to understand what are the new situations, what are the new variables that we need to be considering if we look at predictive analytics or look at more sharper descriptive and more complete contextual descriptive analytics. So that gets to the 360-degree visibility point of view. people want complete contextual views supported by diverse data. So often we see in organizations that the reports come in, they may have a dashboard. The first question is often, well, can I get to this data or that data so I can get a really more complete understanding of what is going on in the supply chain or what's happening with customers or what's affecting why are our operations slower or costing more. So to get a 360-degree view to understand what are all the issues, the variables there is very important. And so at the bottom here, we see 51% wanting to modernize data integration and management to support more users. So democratization is really something that's on a lot of organizations' minds. So let's look at a little bit of research data here. And this is also just, I think, what I would call, to use kind of a term we've known for a long time, the network effect. So the network effect of democratized data insights. And here really just that as demand grows, as there's more data, organizations are digitally transforming business applications. So they could be moving them to the cloud, moving them away from paper-based processes, try to get more of a formalism around them, and of course, generating more data. So as often these get in a position where that's exactly what's happening. You're getting a lot of new data and new demands for that data as more operational users are beginning to work with those business applications, which could be ERP systems or vertical systems. So it does get that network effect of more people producing and sharing more insights, wanting more data, generating more data, and ultimately getting to where you want speed, faster data insights, faster improvement of the business value of the data for products, for services, for engagement. And then, of course, as I mentioned, data for analytics and AI and machine learning, it's just a huge consumer of data and more users moving beyond those simpler BI use cases to try to use analytics. And so the cycles of learning need to be faster there, too. You can't have the workloads, the analytic workloads and workflows taking so long that they can't really have the impact they need to have to drive business value. So here we asked, what would improve if your organization increased investment in enabling faster data insights? And we can see at the very top, trying to affect those decisions that are happening right now, actionable information in dashboards. So the dashboards may be stale, they're maybe delivering historical data that's too old, so it's not in the context of what their decision is. And so actionable information, very critical. Operational decisions and management, 56% looking for that. Performance management. So performance management has been around for a long time to try to use metrics, use key performance indicators to align behavior and decisions with the overall goals of an organization and use various methodologies for that purpose. 42% saying here that they need faster data insights. There's often kind of a disconnect between the analytics that are being done in the organization and these dashboards and scorecards that are being used for performance management. Business strategy, situation awareness and alerting, so particularly for those new situations. And we're seeing also increase business strategy and budget forecasting, planning, 37% there. And so you can see further down the list here other items that probably are in tune with what your organization's goals are with data. So just to kind of pull together the thoughts about democratization, first in the box I have here is a cultural shift. So I think that's one thing to think about is that it's not just about giving people tools or services nowadays, cloud services. It's about also removing institutional and technical hindrances to finding, trusting, and sharing data. So those big three, being able to locate the data quickly, being able to know you can trust that data, and then being able to share it effectively, kind of speak the same language through the data. And these are often really cultural shifts that creating an analytics culture, having good data literacy in the organization so everyone is comfortable with the data that they have, the dashboards they have, the analytics that they're doing. They can interpret the data, feel increasingly comfortable. It's not an overnight process. And then breaking down information silos to increase the value of all the data assets is important because often shared data is where you often get that network effect to increase the value very quickly. So data democratization, what it's about empowering people to use data effectively. So not just giving them tools, but thinking about everything that needs to be done to empower them, to make them comfortable with the data, make them literate with the data. Support trusted data-informed decisions and actions. So again, as I'll talk about further, trusted is very important because a lot of organizations kind of descend into a data chaos if they don't all have agreement about what's trusted data. Using data insights to fuel productive collaboration, since most decisions, most actions are taken in concert with others, or it's in collaborative fashion. So can that be used effectively for that purpose? Enabling fact-based focus on achieving business strategies. So that gets back to that performance management kind of goal, so that the decisions kind of conform with, what is the strategy? And of course, some strategies are long-term, some are short-term, particularly as things are changing, in the middle of the pandemic or with supply chain issues or with weather issues, to make sure everybody is working in a coordinated fashion, and then gaining new perspectives. So new perspectives on customers, markets, and processes, often through analytics. So the factors that we see in our research that are hindering the decisions, a lot of things I think we'll be talking about today, and that really address, are relevant to the intersection between governance and democratized BI. So number one, nearly 2/3, 61%, saying data quality, completeness, and consistency are the present the most hindrances to making data-informed decisions and realizing value from data assets, which is kind of what it's all about. So that alone, there's a lot of issues. It could be quality coming from the sources. It could be that things are just not matching up in terms of business definitions with the larger business definitions with the data definitions. It could be that there's just disputes about how this data is being interpreted. So a lot of issues kind of come into quality that are data issues, technical issues, and also the institutional kind of issues that need to be dealt with. So think about that there's a lot of issues there. So cannot view or access all relevant data in a single view. 43% saying this, and that is often related to the data quality issue. And we see that commonly as organizations are working so hard really to try to get that single view of all relevant data through their BI systems, through dashboards, developing the data warehouses that can make that happen. Slow data updates and refreshes, inadequate real-time data access. Faster is always better in most cases, and so 39% indicating that that's very important, and trying to contract the latency, reduce the latency to get closer to real time. Data silos, that kind of often goes with the data real-time access issues that organizations face. And this is particularly becoming an issue as organizations move to the cloud. It's almost too easy to move to the cloud sometimes. You can set up systems that become kind of shadow IT systems, develop new data silos. So this is becoming an issue in getting to realizing value from the data and not having the ability to see all the data, to get all the data that you need because it's all in silos. And then 33% saying governance and regulatory adherence. And we have a few things on here that address that. They cannot develop a lot of inadequate budget and leadership for modernization. Often, there's lack of kind of a committee view, a governance view that is pulling together the different stakeholders that need to come together for that. And I'm sure you can see other things on here, the difficulty developing pipelines also prominently on here. So let's see. So just to talk about some of these, at least three key challenges here. One is that chaos that often comes from the lack of agreement, the lack of inability to see all the data, and then the data quality issues, which can, as I mentioned, can have a lot of different sources of that quality, often multiple sources, but often ends up being too much duplication because people have silos. They trust their data. They're not going to trust the shared data. And it gets too much duplication and inconsistency from one project to the next. So it's difficult to reuse things. It's difficult to have continuity as you move from one project to the next. The redundant workloads chew up resources, and that's, of course, a problem on premises. But as you move to the cloud, it becomes a cost issue because you're chewing up resources and generating a lot of cost. And it gets difficult to optimize for the priority workloads. What are the priority workloads? We can't see which systems are really delivering value, which were maybe generated no longer valuable, or that there are problems with and need to be rewritten. So inability to access or to assess which products you're delivering value and which are not. So this is a part of that kind of chaos. Many tools, their organization may have, well, I won't name the products, but 4, 5, 6, 7, it's very common in organizations to have multiple tools and then multiple semantic layers. And so the business representations of the data are not coordinated with the data definitions that can happen. So you may go from a dashboard that's being produced by one tool to one at another, and you can't understand going from one to the other. So users are employing these multiple tools, and maybe sometimes the same user having to go, if they're working with one kind of application to another, going to different interfaces, difficult to coordinate. It increases the training that's required for each tool. So each tool, and to interpret the data, it requires its own separate training. And then the uncontrolled data sharing. So the silos, organizations are digitally transforming, but it's not coordinated. Organizations don't have that kind of holistic visibility into what's being shared, what's being used in analytics models, what other content, it might be through social media, through different applications, through other kinds of visualizations that are being shared, maybe embedded in applications. A lot of, lack of control. And this really speaks to governance issues because you can have sensitive data, personally identifiable information that could be leaking out in the organization, which could run afoul, of course, of regulations and cause damage to reputations and financial damage. So a healthy democracy, a data democratization depends on technologies and processes to make it easier to find the data so that users aren't kind of fumbling around and are not satisfied and then encountering bad data quality, that they can find and access that data and then be comfortable analyzing the data and being able to share the data. So as I mentioned before, that the inability to gain the single view of all relevant data is something that kind of ties together all of these different challenges. Reducing data chaos, so that shared in-context data and being able to understand the data quality, depending on what the use case is, be able to trust that quality that is complete and has consistency about it, so you can, do more than one kind of application with it, make more than one kind of decision with that data. Automation, it depends on automation. So a lot of these processes are particularly around developing data catalogs, developing the data lineage, to assembling the single views. It takes a lot of manual work, a lot of administration. But I think we're at a point now in our industry where we're seeing a lot of interesting automation, often AI-driven automation, that can help organizations address the scale and the complexity of the data, and then have better resource optimization, be able to be more efficient in how you're using the resources by using automation. So, and then it depends on data governance for both the trust and the confidence. So let me throw another chart at you here. I've got some good research that I wanted to share today. So this one is looking at to improve users' trust. So to improve their trust in the data, which of the following actions are being undertaken within your organization? And so data quality, no secret there, is number one, with 45% saying that's what they're doing. Although we did let people select all that apply, because often they're doing more than these. So as I mentioned, it transcends to technology. Quality is often, it's about knowing that the data is fit for purpose. And that's where it gets into the literacy issues, is what do the users really need? Do they understand what they need from the data? Are they, getting too much data? They're getting a data dump basically in their dashboard, or is it organized in such a fashion that users can work with it properly? So 37% looking for data literacy training and all those kinds of steps. Standardizing data policies, standards, and procedures. So that's really a governance move where organizations need to kind of bring together all the stakeholders, the data owners, the data stewards, to determine what are those data policy standards and procedures. Certainly some around protecting sensitive information, but others should be around data quality and making sure that the organization is getting the most beneficial use and value out of the data. So facilitating data stewardship and mentoring, 34% are taking that action in their organization to improve trust. And, we do talk about stewardship and mentoring quite a bit at TDWI. And it really is critical to underlying governance. Is really what makes governance happen, is to assign knowledgeable data users, often from the business side, or it could be from the IT side, who can help particularly new users understand where they can find the data, how they can trust the data, what the quality issues are, how they can use things consistently and in a reusable fashion. So pointing them to those data sources. And so their expertise really is around the data. Incredibly valuable people and organizations. And then others on this list, setting clear expectations for responsible data use. That's a governance issue. And then using governance to increase users' confidence in the data. So that's really getting to the trust issues. Validating new sources, and then 22% looking at data lineage. So data lineage, tracking where the data came from, what's happened to it since it's been in the organization, how it has been transformed, enriched, shared, used in dashboards, used in analytics models. So the organization can look at that, which is critical from a regulatory adherence perspective for governance, but it also is critical to understanding these trust issues, understanding the value of the data, making sure the organization isn't spending resources on data and on dashboards and on analytics that are not valuable, and what can be done to make them more valuable. So those are some of the issues that organizations are looking at in our research to improve trust. So governance, I think, we're seeing really that it is about both offense and defense. Defense, everyone's more familiar with and never goes away. It's critical. Protecting particularly sensitive information. So it's about data protection, access controls, being able to do everything that's necessary for security, masking the data if necessary, everything along those lines, and having rules and policies and access control procedures and technologies that can help you with that, for making sure users are working with just appropriate data use as there are more users. And so the silo issues become a problem there. So again, it argues for having this more global view, holistic view, to handle all those kinds of governance, the defensive issues. But the offensive issues are really about, is this data, what can we do to raise the value of data assets in this organization and the value of how people are using the data? And so that is improving the quality, the value of data assets, streamlining the transformation of the data so that it's fit for purpose, so that looking at where there might be bottlenecks, where there are delays going on, where there could be a better way to do it, where more automation could be helpful. Bringing together the stakeholders, the data owners, the stewards, and I have in this illustration that I borrow as a great illustration, just talking about strategy, policy, standards, all the elements that really go into having good governance in the organization. Again, not just tools and not really even just one of these issues, but really all of them. So the strategy, policy, standards, having the architecture, understanding the architecture, having metrics to determine whether the governance is effective is very important to actually be able to measure that, both for the offensive and defensive, both around the data quality issues and then also around the regulatory adherence issues. Having good training and having strategy, and also a strategy that is adaptable to the new situations. And so a lot of that is, again, a people issue, getting together the stakeholders, the data owners, and stewards. We do see in our research that a good number have made a commitment to having good governance in the organization. It's part of the maturation process, but it really ought to be put in place, of course, early in organizations' work with data and developing BI and analytics. Is very important, but we do see that often governance kind of comes later, often after there have been some issues that have developed. 25% have already deployed data governance programs, and I think we'll see that increase as we go forward in later research this year. So looking at the top challenges, 52%, I think this gets to the subject of our webinar today, really increased self-service data access and analysis is the top governance challenge that organizations are facing. And then the second, 43%, having lack of visibility into data-related activities. So not enough understanding of what users are doing with the data, how it's being shared, as organizations look at putting more functionality, analytics, and visualizations embedded in applications. You don't want to lose track of those. So having visibility into that and having a governance kind of view over the self-service is really important. Certainly the growth in volume, the diversity of the data, and just the speed of the data, the big challenge. Costs, we see in our research often organizations are very concerned about the cost of governance. And then, of course, who's going to budget, who's going to pay for that cost? Because often it can be very difficult to get, budget for things that are cross-function in an organization or in our organizations. And so that's where, again, it's important to bring all of the stakeholders in the organization together to discuss how you're going to handle the costs and resources that are necessary to govern and secure the data. Data distributed across on-premises and in the cloud. So the hybrid multi-cloud platforms, as organizations are in either a transition to moving systems to the cloud, or they need to, of course, keep some things resident on-premises for regulatory reasons or just for efficiency reasons. So that's becoming an issue too, is again, needing that kind of holistic view to be able to handle all governance issues through one portal, through one kind of system. Let's see some other things on this list. I think we've kind of discussed a lot of the operationalizing rules for regulatory compliance. So that's another disconnect we often see in organizations where there is a committee that is developing the rules, but this is where the role of data stewards is so important, is to operationalize those rules and make sure there's action and metrics in place to keep up with whether those rules are being applied correctly, and then also whether they're changing or adapting to new kinds of situations, new data, new use cases, and those sorts of things. Okay, so having said those, let's ask our audience, what is their biggest challenge? So what is your biggest challenge in governing democratized business intelligence and self-service analytics? So I itemized some of the issues that organizations are facing. So let's see what our audience is saying today. So first is governance policies do not adequately address BI and analytics dashboards, reports, and other data sharing. So that's often, I think, central to what we're talking about today, is that sometimes it's the case that the data at rest, in a sense, in a data warehouse is governed, but once it's being used in dashboards and analytics and reports and so forth, it becomes less, it's not governed properly, and the policies aren't covering that properly. So that's number one. Second is we have little visibility into and control over what BI content is being produced, published, and shared. So what's being developed there. So I think I've discussed that problem. And third is we cannot measure and manage the value of dashboards, reports, and analytics. So that issue where it's not just about the potential of sensitive data being shared, it's those offense issues where is it valuable to the business? Are these dashboards are people even using them? Or are they ignoring them? What can be done to make them better? Same with reports and same with analytics. And then BI proliferation is uncontrolled. It's hard to govern and integrate so many different systems and metadata. So as I mentioned, lots of users using different tools, different cloud services, making it difficult. And then finally, we have an other category. So if there's one that's not listed, let us know in the ask a question, and then we'll be able to talk about it in the Q&A. All right, so let's take a look at the results. And okay, we can see, nearly 40%, 39.5% saying they have little visibility into and control over what BI content is being produced, published, and shared. Okay, that's interesting. So that's really a major pain point. Second, actually, I was going to try to write down these results. So second is BI proliferation, 25.6%. And then we have 14% saying they can't measure the dashboards or manage the value of the dashboards. And so, there things kind of just out of control. And then, we saw the 40%, 18.6% saying the governance policies not adequately addressing the BI and analytics dashboards. Okay, those are all really interesting. So, and great, somebody offered some answers. So we'll take a look at that in the Q&A. So solving it using shared resources, and I mentioned, so getting the holistic kind of view, and then thinking about the shared enterprise resources that can be valuable. So certainly an enterprise data catalog. Enterprise data catalog comes to the top of the list because this is where organizations can pull together their knowledge about the data. I mean, catalogs have been around forever, around data definitions and gathering metadata in database systems. Every application out there is producing metadata, data warehouses. Often the metadata may be stored there. So what's happened is that there's almost too much metadata sometimes, and so it's difficult to pull it all together. And an enterprise data catalog can be helpful with that. Now, some organizations have catalogs around one platform or around one application or one data platform, I should say, database system, and those are certainly valuable. But as we see this democratization spreading and more kinds of BI and analytics tools being used, an enterprise catalog that can pull all this together can be very valuable. So you might certainly look at that, or if you have one, look at how it can be modernized, automated, upgraded for new use cases. And the catalogs are often integrated with those BI semantic layers, so make sure that that's happening in the organization. Single portal, so this is something I know Mike is going to talk about with metric insights, but this is certainly valuable for monitoring all data use, getting that holistic kind of ability to do that. All day use, all BI dashboards, the reports, all the other kind of artifacts that are out there, the published content across the environment. And then modernization, usually through AI, increasingly AI-driven automation. 45% we see in our research wanting greater automation in their catalogs and other shared resources to reduce the manual management and improvement. So those are steps that can be taken, particularly using the shared resources to solve the challenges. So just to conclude my presentation, focus on increasing trust, and so it's around the data issues, the technology issues, and also institutional kind of getting the culture right to increase the trust. So democratized BI and analytics, it can devolve into the chaos. You don't want that. Users will go to their spreadsheets, their shadow systems, which can be a problem. Improve visibility, so monitor use, monitor the governance itself also to make sure it's effective. Improve things like access controls. You need that holistic visibility across, particularly hybrid multi-cloud, to be able to accomplish that. Balance. So and this is often, again, more than just a technical issue, but a culture issue, is getting the balance between self-service and shared enterprise resources so the users are trusting those shared resources and seeing the business value of them so that they're empowered to do more with the data. It's not just having their self-service tools. So getting the right balance so you don't get the problems of the single-use dashboards, the reports, the analytics, less visibility, and then finally modernizing through particularly AI-driven automation to reduce the delays that are often happen with manual work. So I'm going to have one more poll question, then I'll hand it back to Brenda. So what tool or service is currently most important to your organization's governance of democratized BI and self-service analytics? So what are you using for governance of as you democratize? So is it the BI platform or cloud service itself? Do you have a BI portal so you can look at the uses across the organization of more than one single platform or cloud service? Are you depending on your collaborative platform such as Microsoft SharePoint to manage it? Are you using the data warehouse for governance? Do you have a data catalog or a data lineage tool or service? And then organizations might be just using a spreadsheet. So let's see, and then again, we have ask other, so put it in the check other, and then let us know through the ask a question window what it might be. So let's just take a look at what the results are here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to refresh it one more time to make sure we're getting everybody. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we can see here that 16.7% are using the BI platform or cloud service itself. 12.5% have the BI portal. Same percentage with the collaborative platforms, and then 16% using a data warehouse. 37% have a catalog. Interesting. Nobody's using spreadsheets, so it's actually a good thing. So yeah, very interesting results. Okay, Brenda, with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thanks very much, Dave. And just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have any questions at all, you can enter them in the Ask a Question window, and we'll be getting to those audience questions in the final portion of today's program. And it is my pleasure to now introduce our next speaker, Mike Smitherman, VP of Sales and Marketing with Metric Insights. Mike has over 15 years of product and marketing experience in the business intelligence industry. Mike helped bring analytics products to market with senior roles at Seagate Software, AIM Technology, T-Leaf, Acero, and Good Data. Great to have you here with us today, and welcome, Mike. I'll hand it over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Brenda, and thanks, David. I kind of want to spend my time building on what you've been talking about, obviously, and particularly as it relates to how you might put some of these concepts that we've been discussing into sort of a more practical approach and into practice. And as David alluded to, sort of the overriding challenge that we see in organizations that I think we can all agree on is that there's no lack of data and BI and analytics today. But it's become somewhat of a victim of its own success. And what I'm going to be suggesting is that to really effectively democratize data, actually you have to do a little bit of the opposite in terms of putting some control and what I'll refer to as governance, but control and governance around your BI processes, because without that, we're just living in this environment where absolutely BI environments are cluttered with, both duplicative and obsolete content alongside, or hiding that the data and reports are useful to users. And as we've discussed, it's often compounded by sort of multiple sources of data and BI in the organization. And what we're seeing in businesses really is, it's hurting in terms of there's this friction growing more and more between the BI teams and sort of the business users out in the organization, with BI teams still getting overwhelmed with questions and requests about data and reporting, even though they're putting a lot of content out there for users. They don't necessarily know what's going on in an organization where dashboards and reports are getting created in many different teams. For them, if they get a request come in, it's often easier to sort of recreate a piece of content, even if it exists already, because they don't know what's out there. And so a lot of the valuable content that we want people using is getting underutilized. And it all comes back to this concept of sort of a lack of control around all this valuable information we have. And when that's happening in the BI team, business users are frustrated because, again, they don't know what they should be using. They don't know what they should trust. They don't have the context around how they should be using stuff. And in most organizations we walk into, it's in an environment where it's easier for a business user to pick up the phone to the BI team than actually use anything out there today that's being created. And so, I'd like to sort of suggest what is, this is not brain surgery, but a simple process where you can start to put some controls around how BI and data gets, let's say, curated in your environment. And then I'm going to spend sort of the rest of my time showing you some of the Metric Insights platform as an example of how you can use technology to help drive some of these processes. And again, not necessarily because it's Metric Insights, however you do it, you need some sort of technology to support these processes. But, the process should start by really, sorry about the slide here, so formatting error when it got uploaded, but the process should start with being able to synchronize content from all different sources into a single space where you can control and govern it. Projects are destined to fail if you try and control and govern content in individual tools, because every tool has a different way of doing it, if they have any way at all. It's always organized in different ways in different tools, and it becomes very difficult to manage it at the tool level. So we'll look at the concept of basically synchronizing content into a centralized portal where BI teams can manage it and where users can access it without getting lost in the underlying technologies. So you need to have a governed space. You need to have a way of publishing the content that you want people using into that space. So it's no good to just create more and more content, more and more data sets, reports, dashboards, and hope that people can find them and have those exist alongside stuff that's become obsolete or that's duplicative. You need to have some control and some publishing process that drives the publishing of the content that you actually want people using. And we'll look at some examples again, but in a way that selects the right content, that documents it and categorizes it and certifies it in a way that when people come in and access it, they know exactly what it is and that they can trust it. So we need to curate the content for users. Every data set, every BI report, every dashboard that's out there has a shelf life in your organization. As the business changes, as the way we run the measure the business changes, reports over time, by their nature, become obsolete. And if we don't manage that, we just add to the mess that's out there. And so there needs to be a process where there's a continual sort of tagging of content for review so that you can monitor those data sets, you can monitor those reports and dashboards to make sure that they're still relevant. And one measure of that is usage. And we'll look at sort of usage tracking of assets as a way of sort of people voting with their feet to say whether something is still relevant to the organization. And then feedback is important. Having a mechanism for capturing feedback, even if something is used prevalently across the organization, it may have been designed in such a way that it's frustrating or could be more useful if there were some updates to it. And so getting user feedback to understand what is useful to them, what's their perspective on it, helps again drive whether a piece of content is or a data set is still useful to the organization. And then having a sort of update and review process that manages the change, if you like, that requires people come in and attest to whether a particular asset is still relevant, whether a particular metric, a particular data set is still relevant to the organization, and making those decisions about whether we should keep it, whether we should update it, or whether we should remove it if it's become obsolete. And so I think, again, in order to successfully democratize data and BI and analytics, you actually have to put some process behind it to make sure that there's some control around that so that everyone's able to get maximum value out of it. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here and jump across to the Metric Insights platform and show you some sort of practical examples of technically how this might look in an organization. And again, don't get too tied up on the fact that this is Metric Insights. Think about it from sort of a concepts perspective. And the first concept, as I mentioned in that process flow, is about having a centralized space, a layer on top, a portal, if you like, that connects to really any source of data or BI in the organization that you want to make available to users. And that's obviously, in a lot of cases, multiple BI tools like Tableau and Power BI and legacy tools like Business Objects, MicroStrategy, whatever it might be. But it's also understanding that BI and data exists everywhere. So there may be data sets that you want to publish to your analysts. There may still be spreadsheets and documents out there that contain quote unquote BI that you want to make available to users. There may be data science applications getting created in, say, our Shiny or whatever the technologies are behind the scenes. And they're all sort of data and assets that you want to make available to users. So you need a portal that brings all that together and really hides the complexities of what the underlying technology is to users, because reality is there's going to be new technologies coming into your business as well. And so you want to be able to seamlessly push those into the process. And so having a portal, a catalog, if you like, that organizes content irrespective of the underlying technology is important. And having a catalog that when you publish the content, it gets published in a way that gives context to the users. So if you have a dashboard, say from Tableau here, that we've decided is the sort of best dashboard that we want to push out into the portal, when we publish that, we shouldn't just have a name out there and a folder that it's in. We should publish it with context. So yes, we should have the name and the description. We should also maybe show a visualization of what the dashboard looked like the last time it updated, so preview image. We should maybe tag it with the necessary context around what it means. We should maybe include glossary terms and definitions around, for the metrics within this particular dashboard, how they calculated and who owns those definitions. And these may be coming from your data catalog as it gets published, so that we're synchronizing with that information wherever it might be being captured. We should have ownership on the assets, so people know who's responsible for it and who's accountable for it and who I can ask questions if I have them. We should know how up to date it is each time we look at it. So when was the dashboard last refreshed? And then further sort of compliance and categorization that might make sense for this particular asset in your organization. So does it contain PII data? And does that, dictate whether I can perhaps download content or share it with other users? That should be built into the process so that, I can't do those things if I'm not allowed. How is it classified? Is it for internal use? Is it publicly facing? But all this context should make me literate around this particular asset so that I know, this is something that I'm looking for, and this is something that I want to use, and I know exactly how I should be using it. And if a user comes into this, it should keep them in the portal environment. It shouldn't take them out to the underlying tool so they get lost over there and then have to navigate to another tool. I should be able to get the full functionality of this dashboard embedded within the portal here. Again, kind of irrelevant to me that the underlying technology might be Tableau here. A quick point about sort of the data quality piece of this as well. Obviously a key piece in getting usage, effective usage and trust around data. And I think one of the challenges is, reality is data is never going to be 100% accurate all the time. Things go wrong, issues happen, technical issues occur. And if you publish incorrect data, as you know, to end users, then you lose trust very quickly. But I think the issue is end users don't necessarily, they understand that there's going to be issues with data. What they get frustrated about is when they don't know about them. And so having a mechanism as well for communicating through announcements or notifications when there are data quality issues is as important as recognizing that there are issues in the first place. And so as a user, if I come into this dashboard understanding the context, but I see that there's issues happening with the data, I'm not going to waste my time on that. I understand, I'll come back later. You're not necessarily losing my trust in that scenario. So whether I'm looking at a Tableau dashboard or something from Power BI, for example, the experience should be the same to the end user. I'm navigating in one place. The only difference is the underlying technology. And that should be the same as well if I'm looking at, say, spreadsheets or documents. Again, they're relevant BI still within the organization. And so I should be able to come in and flip through different versions of a spreadsheet and have the necessary context in the same way as if this was something in one of my BI tools. And as it relates to sort of policy and governance as well, if you have a centralized environment like this, you can use sort of that announcement technology as well to enforce and track policy. So if we're publishing a financial report here and it requires that there's certain usage policies around it and that people understand that, well, we need to make them aware of it and we need to tell them about it and we need to ensure that they're accepting those policies and that we can track who has and hasn't accepted those policies. And again, trying to do this at the individual asset and tool level would be difficult. Doing it in a centralized way, in a centralized space, helps me manage it more effectively. And so by bringing this all together, again, whether it's documents, BI tools, whether it's data sets that we're publishing for our analysts so that they know what's going on, again, it should all happen in sort of this centralized space and give you more control over it. And in doing that, we haven't got time to look at all this now, but in doing that, it gives me one environment. It gives me an easy way of searching through content, regardless of where it may have come from. And again, not having to understand the complexities of the underlying tool. And finally, before we go to some Q&A, I want to touch on sort of the process around sort of the publication and tracking of this as well. So however you do this, you need some sort of workflow process and engine that allows you to publish the curated content with the context that we spoke about. And then in our environment, it's this ability to be able to have these publishing workflows, which can be as simple or as complex as the content needs, but ultimately where the application will recognize when new reports, dashboards, data sets get created, allow them to go through different stakeholders within the business who are responsible for reviewing them, documenting, adding context, before ultimately they get published and presented to the end users with a stamp of approval, such as a certification, so that, again, users know when they come into that original view we were looking at, when something's been certified, what level of scrutiny it had, and who is accountable for that certification, again, driving trust within the organization so they know they can trust it. So publishing workflows are one way where, again, you can curate an experience rather than just throwing it out there for users. And then finally, we talked about, in our flowchart there, we talked about being able to measure the effectiveness of content to decide whether it is still relevant and useful for the organization. And the two sort of components of that being, you need to measure usage. Again, people voting with their feet, whether it's a data set, whether it's a dashboard, whether it's a report, are they actually using this content over time? And looking at usage patterns. So even though I know, this sales analysis dashboard has been most popular over the last 60 days, well, was that because I published it 60 days ago and told everyone and they all came in once and looked at it? Or is this something that's been continually useful over the last 60 days? And so having detailed analytics on the usage of content and data sets is important. This being one example where for this report, who's coming in and looking at it? And these users, the ones that stay near the middle, are the ones that are coming in every day and looking at it. The ones that drift to the outside sort of came in on that day one when I promoted it and have never looked at it again. And so you can start to see whether it's an ongoing engagement that is happening or whether it's something that's starting to reach its sell-by date and not useful to the business anymore. Usage is one side of it. The other is, as I mentioned in the slides, is being able to capture feedback around the content as well. And so doing that in a consistent way at this sort of portal, this aggregated level, where you can unobtrusively request feedback from users in a similar way to what you might see on a website or something, where you can ask questions, you can gather feedback, you can get ratings, again, get people's subjective feedback on whether something is useful anymore, and use that then to make a decision about whether a particular report like this is something that we should keep in our catalog. So what is the engagement? Is it still high or dropping off like it has here? And what is the feedback that I'm getting on that particular asset? So using some technology, using some process to help govern the assets that you ultimately want to democratize to your users is important to keeping control and making it useful to the organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Brenda, and maybe let's spend the last few minutes on questions that are out there.
That sounds perfect. Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, let's just jump right in and get through as many of these audience questions as we can. If you have any questions you haven't submitted yet, feel free to do so as well. So we'll start with this one for you, Mike. Someone's asking, excuse me, can you share how to approach this with different size organizations, as I assume strategy may vary based on the size?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think the trap that organizations could fall into is sort of let's call it over governance, right? In terms of you don't want governance being a blocker to actually democratization of data, and so I think it's as much about size of organization as type of content that you're pushing out there, in terms of having the necessary level of governance that's appropriate to the situation. And so, probably most reports don't have to go through a 5-stage process where it's multiple stakeholders and multiple teams who have to sign off on it before it can see the light of day. And that goes across sort of the type of content. It's also relevant to the size of organization. If you're in an organization where there needs to be some governance, but not over-governed, then you need to take that into account. And one way to think about it, I think, as well, is to look at those usage statistics. So, what is the impact a particular asset or data set has on the organization? What's the implications if there's an issue with it? And how wide an audience is that being used for? And that can typically dictate the sort of level of governance and the approach that you take for that particular report or asset.
Very good, thanks. Here's the next one. What are several good practices in place to prioritize new data sets?
So I'm interested in Dave's thoughts on this as well. But for us, what we see customers doing, whether it's data sets or new reporting as well, is to base it on sort of usage, well, twofold. Usage of what's out there already. So where are you seeing the most uptick in terms of usage of content and data, and in what sort of parts of the organization, and where are they seeing benefit, because that can probably drive your focus. I think you have to be cautious of the people who shout loudest typically get the focus as well. So also seeing where perhaps data is getting underutilized in the organization, might be an area where you want to put some focus as well. So I think usage is sort of a leading indicator, whether it's, again, because you're going after the people who are using a lot and they're getting value, or whether you're trying to fill in gaps and can help, set some focus there. I think you might be on mute, Dave.
Yeah.
Apologize for that. Yeah, and I think not all data is the same. So some, certainly it's good to assess the quality issues that could be an issue, and also the PII kind of sensitivity of the data. And so that will dictate what kind of governance processes it needs to go through. And then understanding, how is the data going to be used? Is it to complete a picture that the organization is already kind of trying to complete, or is it, what's the relevance of the data, in other words? And I think that, Mike, you spoke to it quite a bit, I think, in your presentation. A lot of organizations don't have a good sense of that. So the more they can have that, they can be more efficient about how they bring in new data sets and understand, very quickly what its purpose is and what its value will be.
Great. Let's go to this question for you, Mike. Squeeze in one more here. You talked about driving faster ROI. Can you talk more about how you measure the success of governance programs to justify them?
Yeah, so I think, obviously this is critical. I think, Dave, you spoke a bit about sort of the business case for governance in your slides, and obviously this is a key part of it, I think. The way we see organizations measuring ultimate success is around sort of usage and engagement. So, for the curated set of assets that you're putting out there, are you seeing an uptick in sort of usage of data and analytics across the organization? Because that also translates into quite a hard ROI around license utilization of the underlying tools that you're paying for as well. So, it's not unusual in sort of cluttered environments to see, organizations where the licenses that they're paying for their BI tools, maybe less than 50% of them are actually getting used because, again, it's easier for people to pick up the phone. So driving it from sort of that end user perspective, are you getting better usage out of data assets, and analytics can be an indicator that you're doing the right thing and you can tie to ROI. And then I think the second piece is definitely the compliance one, which doesn't go away. Measuring the level of compliance and governance that you're applying to this content. So things like, the usage policy acceptance, are you now getting that? Are people understanding how they should be using it? The driving of the usage of reports based on, say, do they contain PII data? Are you ensuring that people aren't able to, say, download data or whatever it might be? So those two aspects, but I really think it's the usage and engagement one that you can tie to a real, hard ROI around the spend in the BI organization.
Very good. Thank you.
That's great stuff. Go ahead, Brenda.
No, you finish your thought, Dave.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think a lot of those things that Mike just mentioned could be turned into metrics, as he mentioned, and but then thinking that not all governance is the same. I mean, some data requires more intense sort of governance around PII, whereas other doesn't. So not all policies should be the same across different types of data and different use cases.
Great. We have unfortunately come to the end of our time for today. So I just want to take a moment and thank our speakers today. We heard today, of course, from Dave Stoddard with TDWI and Mike Smitherman with Metric Insights. Also, of course, a big thank you to Metric Insights for sponsoring today's webinar. Please remember that we recorded the event. We'll be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. Feel free to share that with colleagues. Also, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, I know that question had popped up from a couple people. Just use the click here for a PDF line to receive that. And finally, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, and webinars about BI, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. From all of us here today, let me say thank you very much for attending. This does conclude today's event.
Thanks, everyone.